it was hard. It was very hard. I mean, like, I went from living this like high intensity all the time, go, 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 to my body literally being like, we are not going anymore, but we are also going to feel like 24/7 we are being chased by the largest bear you've ever seen. And you're just going to be okay with it. You're going to be okay with gasping for air because that was how my body responded.
Welcome to a Healthy Push podcast. I'm Shannon Jackson, former anxiety sufferer turned adventure, mom, and anxiety recovery coach. I struggled with anxiety, panic disorder, and agoraphobia for 15 years. And now I help people to push past the stuff that I used to struggle with. Each week, I'll be sharing real and honest conversations along with actionable and practical steps that you can take to help you push past your anxious thoughts, the symptoms, panic, and fears. Welcome. You're right where you're meant to be. Carly, welcome to a Healthy Push podcast. I am so happy that you've agreed to join me, and I can't wait to dive into our conversation about high-functioning anxiety and perfectionism. But before we do, can you start by just giving us an intro to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Shannon. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat a little bit about high functioning anxiety because it held on to so much of my life for so long. So I'm excited to chat a little bit about it and my experience with it. But my name's Carly. I am the voice behind Healing the Anxious Mind on Instagram. And I also, in my spare time, I always like to say, though I don't have much of that, I am a second year medical student here in Canada. So I'm studying to hopefully be a future OBGYN. So that's my goal. So I'm doing both of those right now, and I'm absolutely loving every minute of it.
That is so cool. I did not know that about you, and this is really funny. I am actually a practice manager of an OBGYN practice.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, this is really ironic and funny. So, yeah, I've been in the healthcare field for like 16 years, and I landed myself. I had worked in OBGYN before, and I loved it, and I got back into it, and it's an amazing field to work in. So that's awesome. Good for you. All right, so let's dive in. I know that you had a personal experience with high functioning anxiety. So I'd love to hear from your perspective. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so this is sort of the funny thing for me about high functioning anxiety. And I think the funny thing for so many other people is that I looked normal. I looked like I had everything all together all the time. So I still sort of fight some of these thoughts now. So realistically, when you looked at me from the outside, I was volunteering at 10 different places. I was doing research. I was getting A's in school. I was doing all of these things and I was doing them very well. I was like showing up for my friendship, showing up for my partner, showing up for everything all the time. And like to the point where it was just like, I thought this was normal. Like I truly had no idea what high functioning anxiety was. And for me, it truly looked like, so from the outside, it looked great. It was like, oh, wow, look at that. Like, you got it all together. And truly like it looked like I did. And I honestly, sometimes my ego was like, oh yeah, we have this all together. And then I was like, does everyone worry all the time that their worth is tied to their productivity? Like, does everyone worry all the time that like I am ascribed based off of what I do and perform? But then that's how I see myself. Like I'm just like this working machine 24/7. And that's sort of how I felt. I started to have difficulty sleeping. I was drinking probably 5 or 6 cups of caffeine a day because I was staying up late. My partner is a night owl. I am not a night owl. And we were early on in our relationship. And I was like, well, I'm going to stay up till 3 a.m. with him. Terrible idea when I worked at 7. But you know what? It was just the way it was. And I just didn't really think anything of it. I like to say it was in my youth. Although I am currently just about to turn 27, my youth was like 22 to 24 was where that youth thing where I was like, I feel unstoppable. And then one day when I was 24, I no longer felt unstoppable and I hit a very large wall of burnout. And that's where this entire journey truly started for me. That was the difficult thing for me with high functioning anxiety was I never actually knew it was high functioning anxiety until I burnt out and started experiencing panic and anxiety to reflect back on what I was doing. And I was like, oh, that wasn't the healthiest choice for me. But I didn't know that. I just thought this was a regular thing.
Yeah. And I think that's so many people's experiences, right? So I would love to hear to help put things into perspective. Like, what were you doing at that time when you were struggling with high functioning anxiety? It sounds like maybe you were in school and also volunteering. Were you working? Like, what did it look like?
Yeah, so I sort of was doing a bit of everything. So I was doing a research project at the time. I was volunteering in the hospital, at a women's shelter. I was volunteering at St. John Ambulance doing first aid and medical first responder stuff. I was on the weekends doing concerts and doing CPR and first aid at concerts. So I was in this like high stress state all the time. And I just thought that was normal. Even when I would have time off, so I was pursuing my undergraduate degree at the time as well, and I was finishing that up. And then when I stopped doing that, I actually very quickly got a job as I was a kinesiologist and I helped run a small business. So I took on an entire small business with every aspect of it except for payroll, really just like getting clients, doing all this advertising while I was volunteering, while I was doing everything else. And for me, I just thought that was normal. And unfortunately, especially here in Canada, getting into medicine is very competitive. And I'm not saying that I did anything right, because when I look back, I'm like, well, I mean, I got into medicine, which was great, but I don't know if I needed to sacrifice myself for it. And I reflect on that now, but it is very competitive. And I've talked to a lot of my colleagues who are also in my program now, and a lot of us felt that pressure, then that high functioning anxiety that we never truly realized we had until we got in. And then we were like, oh, people don't do this. Like, I only learned that I had high functioning anxiety after experiencing anxiety and starting to heal from that and being like, oh, this is interesting. But yes, everything was off. Like, my sleep schedule was off. I was over exercising at the time. So I would be exercising to de stress, but I do like a super high intensity workout. And then that just adds to that nervous system activation that I had going, and it just kept feeding it. And even when I had time off, I'd like busy myself with like, oh, I'm going to do this craft, or I'm going to make this, and I'm going to do that. And it was a lot. It was a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, and I think the exercising component, right, is probably really familiar to a lot of people because we get this
Mm,
messaging surrounding you have to move your body, it's healthy for your mind, right? But there's like a
yes.
certain extent where it's too much and like that's not
Yeah.
the intention of moving your body is to not like, force it to do things until you feel like you're going to throw up. Like that's not what it's meant for. But I'm really
Yes.
curious. You said something initially about
Mm,
your thoughts. What were the
mm,
type of thoughts that you had? Because you said you had, certain kinds of thoughts and you didn't know that other people struggled with those sort of things. What were those thoughts
mhm.
that you struggled with?
Yeah, I think a lot of it for me at that time was that perfectionism, high functioning anxiety interplay of ascribing my worth based off of everything I was doing. So if I didn't get an A, or I didn't get the best grade, or I didn't get the best praise, I was trash and I wasn't good enough. And that it was very all or nothing. It was very much like I was either amazing and great, which realistically I never was, because I always put these expectations on myself that were so high that I could never I could never meet them really. Like, one time I had like a big research presentation, and I was doing two sets of research at the time. So everyone usually does one poster presentation. I decided to do two because perfectionism was just ruling my life, and I was like, I'm going to do two. And then I also won an award for one of them, and I was disappointed that the other one didn't win me an award. I
Oh,
literally was
no.
sitting there and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm worthless. And like that day I'd also gotten my period. So like I was just discombobulated to the nth degree. But I truly thought that I had failed because I didn't get as much praise on the other one, though the day was wonderful. I got to share research that I was super passionate about. And like, it was great looking back on it. It was a wonderful day. My boss came, my partner came. Like, this was the first time a lot of them had met some of the academics that I was working with. Like, it was lovely, except for the fact that my perfectionism brain was so stuck in that all or nothing. These are the expectations that I set, and you truly can't meet them. Like, I was setting expectations for myself that just weren't attainable. They weren't smart. We always talk about smart goals. They were not smart. They were dumb goals because they weren't good. They were just so unattainable. And then I would focus on whatever I didn't get done rather than what I did. And I just thought everyone lived like that. I just thought everyone was super stressed out and all the time. And like, my partner's like a chill cucumber. And I just like, I look at him and I'm like, why don't you care? Why aren't you angry at this person on the road? And that's where I started to notice things started to go out of hand, where it was like I was angry at everyone. Like, everything caused irritability in my life. And I didn't really realize why until now.
Yeah. Don't you love that? I'm also paired with somebody who is very chill, like super chill, and he'll look at me sometimes and be like, "Why? Why does this even matter to you?" And I was
Yeah.
the same way. I mean, in college, I remember feeling like I have to get the 4.0. If I don't get the
Yeah.
4.0, there's no point. Like, why am I
Hmm.
doing this? And
Yeah.
my whole thought process, I mean, like you're saying, you literally drive yourself to the point where you're so stressed, you're so burnt out. And then I don't know about you, and I want you to talk about this. I finally hit a point where I hit a wall and I was
Yeah.
doing all the things like you said. I was not getting good sleep. I was exercising a lot. I also consumed a whole ton of alcohol,
Mm.
all in an attempt to help to balance everything out. And when you're so in it, you just like
Yeah.
keep spinning, you keep going. And same for you with me. I
Yeah.
felt like my worth was based on my accomplishments and my
Hmm.
accolades. And I felt like I had something to prove. And of course, it just severely, severely negatively impacted my mental health. So
Yeah.
what did that look like to you? Like, how did you know and, like, arrive at the knowledge that you were actually struggling with high functioning anxiety?
Yeah, I resonate so much with what you shared, Shannon, because, like, for me, it was really hitting the wall that made me recognize that I
Yeah.
was living that life, and I didn't realize that that was the case. But truly, it took a panic attack to even start to think, because so far in my life, especially with, I was 24 at the time, in going into my life, like, I truly was just like, I'm invincible. Like, what is mental health? Like, I knew that it was a thing, but truly I did not know what it truly was. One of my close friends at the time was dealing with like anxiety and panic and that experience for her. And I sat there and I listened to her, and I look back on this now and I listened to her and I was supportive to her, but I had no idea. I didn't know what to do because I was like, I have never experienced this before. And I'm not saying that you have to experience it to be a good supporter for somebody, but being so young and being so naive, I had absolutely no idea. I was like listening, I'm like, what can I do to help you? Because I was like obviously very empathetic toward her, but I didn't know what to tap into. I didn't have any experience that I could even relate to that would connect me on the level that she was experiencing. And then I hit this wall of burnout. And then I was like, yes. I mean, this shook my life. Truly, it shook everything underneath the surface to the point where it was hard. It was very hard. I mean, like, I went from living this like high intensity all the time, go go go, to my body literally being like, we are not going anymore, but we are also going to feel like 24/7 we are being chased by the largest bear you've ever seen, and you're just going to be
Mm.
okay with it. You're going to be okay with gasping for air because that was how my body responded. Or, I couldn't even go to the gym. The thought of the gym and my heart rate elevating just sent me into some weird spiral of like, oh, no, this is not good. And, coming from a physiology background, logically, I knew wholeheartedly that this wasn't going to hurt me. Like, I knew wholeheartedly that it was just my heart beating. Like, anyone truly can pay attention to their heart beating if you focus hard enough. And I was just so hyper vigilant. All the things that were in the background just came right to the forefront for me. And I truly, like, I knew it wasn't going to hurt me logically, but that did not stop those anxious thoughts from coming into my mind and starting to truly take over my life for many months. I just let it rule me because I didn't know what to do and I didn't know how to fix it. And everything I wanted to do was just a quick fix. Everything I wanted to do was
Yeah.
like, I'll go to one therapy session. And if they don't fix me by then, well, no more therapy for me or whatever it was. I was like, oh, okay, I tried everything, like essential oil, CBD oil, like therapy. I chatted to my doctor about potentially trying medication. Like, I did all the things because I was just like, just find me something that makes me not feel this way anymore. And
Yeah.
didn't work that way. But that's okay because we learned that it didn't work that way.
Right. I think it's so I would love for you to share, like, what that first panic attack looked like, because I know so many can relate to your story and what you're saying, where
Yeah.
you get to a point where you hit a wall and then you
Yeah.
experience your first panic attack. And like you said, coming from a health and physiology background,
Mhm.
like, and even people now, people in my community, I'm sure in yours will say, I know that it can't hurt me, but it
Yeah.
feels so dangerous.
Yeah.
So what did that first panic attack look like for you?
Yeah, it was so interesting because I think for me, so I was working. Of course, I was working. So I was on camera. It was like, or I wasn't on camera. I was actually off camera, but I teach MCAT prep online because that
Oh.
was one of the jobs that I pursued. Oh, yes, that was my other job. I had a few jobs at the time. I forget now because I don't do many of those things anymore. But I was working, I was on my computer doing my thing. And then I just sort of felt this like I'd just eaten. I again got very little sleep. I literally chased a nap with pre-workout. I was like, I'm going to have some caffeine and then go have a nap because that seemed to be what worked. Like if I had a headache or something, that was just what worked for me. And like, I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was fine. Because invincible 24-year-old Carly was like, we can do it all. Um, we could not do it all, but like in the best way possible, because now all that I do aligns very nicely with me and I love it. But that first panic attack, I was sitting, I was doing this, I'd just eaten dinner. There was nothing wrong. Like nothing was like, some people sort of have this belief that like a panic attack has to come from like a true, like something happening, like something
Hmm.
has to happen. And like, there's like this true, like clear trigger. It was literally nothing for me. I was literally sitting there and I was like, I don't feel well. So in the past, I think I'd had what I would quantify as a panic attack when I ate a lot of food. This was like in the months prior, and it only happened like twice. But I thought at the time I labeled it as like, oh, I'm just eating too much. And I felt a little bit sweaty and I felt really unwell. And it always happened when I ate too much. So I never really concerned myself with it. So I just never thought it was panic. And like it was almost good at that time that I didn't label it as such, because this time I was like, this is a panic attack. This is exactly what this is. Because I knew from my friend who'd shared with me her experience that like, this is probably what this is. Like, this is panic. And then immediately it just spiraled into like, oh my God, this is panic. And then it went from like
Yeah.
tightness in my chest to like my heart was beating out of my chest. My mouth was so dry. I didn't have any saliva. And for me, a lot of my symptoms of anxiety manifest in my throat. So difficulty swallowing, fear that you can't swallow, or trying to swallow too early because like you're trying to control the
Hmm.
swallowing. And for me, that was to the point where I kept misfiring. And that's a very, for anyone that's ever experienced any sort of swallowing anxiety, that misfire is terrifying because I know the physiology, but the feeling that my body would send, the jolt of fear every time that would happen, would just further exacerbate. So, like, I'm sitting on my couch. I had to leave my class that I was in. I'm sitting on my couch. I'm like, Dad, I don't feel good. And like, I knew this wasn't like hospital don't feel good, but that's just more my knowledge. Like I completely resonate with people who experience this and are like, I need to call 911 right now. There is something wrong. But for me, it was just like, okay, I know that I'm fine, but I'm not fine. Like this was just like, I was sipping water, but I could barely drink it. I had to keep pacing around the house. Eventually I had to go for a walk because I was so panicky and I just had to get moving. And that seemed to be something that really helped me moving forward, but it didn't necessarily make
Mm.
anything go away. It just dissipated some of that excess energy. So I wasn't in that constant panic. And truly, that's been my one true panic attack, I would say, was the first one. I luckily didn't experience as much panic, but I had like daily panic. Like every day I woke up feeling like I was panicking, but it would last all day. So it wasn't as severe as that first one, but it was just that chronic, debilitating, like every day you'd wake up and you just wish it to be gone. And every day
Mhm.
it wasn't. And then it was just like, but that's how I realized I was also feeding it at the time. But I just didn't know. I had no idea. Mental health was just not something that anyone ever talked about. My one friend was the only person I had that ever experienced anything to do with their mental health. And that was only a few years ago. And it's amazing how much even I've seen the changes in myself, but also just in the community with mental health awareness. Like it is amazing what just even the past 2 years, how we've progressed. But
Yeah.
yes, it was a lot. It was a lot. It was terrifying. It was something that I look back on and I don't actually fear anymore. It's like, if that happened to me again, it'd be like, you know what? Come at me. Like, come at me. Adrenaline, come at me.
Right.
But it's still uncomfortable. Like it is something where it's
Yeah.
like, I acknowledge that it's uncomfortable and I acknowledge that that would be a really difficult moment for me. But I also acknowledge that I know wholeheartedly now that I could get through that moment and it would be totally
Yeah, and you've learned so much since then, right? And like you
fine.
had the one friend and thankfully you did and you had some knowledge and now, you've gained so much more knowledge and that's something that helped I know both of us
Yeah.
significantly along our recovery journeys is because like you if you just like can't help something that where you don't know.
Yeah.
You might know the basics of what's going on, but like what is actually going to help me? And like you said, when we first started the conversation, in the moment you just look for anything like a quick fix. Like what is something that
Yeah.
I can take? What is something that I can do? Like what is going to make this go away? And
Hmm.
unfortunately, like especially with your scenario, high functioning anxiety and perfectionism is something that's has built so much stress up over time, and
Yeah.
you've had all of this ingrained in you, and it's not something that you can easily just you know
Bye. Like,
right, right. Just
yeah.
go away. Like, I now know what's going on. I can fix this. And like, this is going to be fixed in a jiffy. And unfortunately, stress builds up and all of these things, the unhealthy habits that you've learned, they all take time to start to, build in new healthy habits that start to take away those unhealthy pathways that you've built up. So
Yes.
I'm curious, you said something, and I know a big part of high functioning anxiety is people on the outside wouldn't have any idea that you're struggling with it. And I think this
Hmm.
is where high functioning anxiety and perfectionism go hand in hand. Is I know too from my experience, I was such a perfectionist that part of
Yeah.
me didn't want anyone to know what I was struggling with because I wanted to keep up the facade that I had it all together. I could do it all. I didn't need anybody's help. Um,
Yeah.
and I would get there sort of on my own mentality. And it was so unhealthy. And
Yeah.
I didn't share it with really anyone, especially
Hmm.
the really hard stuff, even with my mom. And, my
Yeah.
go to at the time was my boyfriend, who's now my husband. I didn't
Yeah.
even share things with them because it wasn't just that I wanted to look like I had it all together. It was also, I felt a whole lot of shame with what I
Hmm.
experienced on a daily basis.
Yeah.
So I'm curious from your perspective, did you ever hide what you were struggling with? And what did that look like for you?
Oh yeah, I hid it from everyone. To be honest, Shannon, I hid it from myself. And
Yeah.
I think that was the worst part. It wasn't like, sure, it was the people pleasing side of me that also goes hand in hand with perfectionism and high functioning anxiety and that fear of shame and guilt. But truly, that shame and guilt came from me. Like, I just didn't want to acknowledge that I could struggle. That this would lead me anywhere because I just thought about it as all negative. I truly held such a stigma toward my own mental health and well-being because I was
Hmm.
just so convinced that like I had to keep going. This was for me, like at the time where I was describing all the things I was doing, I was also pursuing medicine and I had to apply 3 times to get in. It wasn't just a one and done. So, after the first time, it's like, your worth, your entire life, you fill out this big application and your worth is defined based off of a score that you get. And if the score is high enough than the average, you get the interview. If it's not, you don't. And the first time that I applied, I put my entire life on that piece of paper, and my score was like less than half of what it should have been to get into medicine. And immediately when I saw that, I wasn't like pursuing medicine super hard at that point. I will say that like my high functioning anxiety really ramped up between like 22 and 24 because I'd applied once and then I was like, okay, I have to try harder now. Though I was already trying super hard, but my perfectionism really kicked in when it was like, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough. Like, look at this. I'm nowhere near the score that I needed to get in. Well, now I just have to take on more. Like, it wasn't about how I felt. It wasn't about anything. And that's where that pushing away came from. It was so easy for me to say like, no, like, I don't need to feel this right now. Like, I had extremely bad, especially my last semester, testing anxiety. Like, I feel like I almost probably was panicking every time I would write an exam because I put so much pressure on myself to do well. And every time I walked in, I'd walk out and like I took a lot of my courses with my partner now. We were dating at the time, but I took a lot of courses with him because he was also in the same career stream. Though now he's in law school and he's absolutely in love with it. So I'm very happy for him. But at the time we were in these same courses together and he'd come out and he'd be like, how'd you feel? And I'd be like, that was terrible. Like worst case scenario, like that was the worst thing in the world. And he's like, Carly, like, I'm pretty sure you did really well. And I was like, no, like you probably did better than me. This is terrible. Like that was so hard. And then like I'd get the top mark in the class or like the second top mark in the class, but I would still feel not good enough. I would be like, yeah, but like, that one question from months ago. And
Yeah.
that's how, for me, that high functioning anxiety like showed up. But I didn't think that that was abnormal because I was also surrounded by a group of people that were also like, oh my gosh, that was the worst exam in the world. And we all were like the top scorers of the class. And you're like, oh, okay, we should really think
Yeah.
about this. But it was just almost the culture. And I hate to say that because like hustle culture frustrates me so much at this point, but I still see it. I look at my colleagues, I still see it, and I still see them perpetuating high functioning anxiety. And I'm so glad that I am not currently in that place. But for me, I
Yeah.
pushed it away from everyone. I didn't tell, like, my dad knew after I had the panic attack because I was at home, living at home at the time. Even my partner kind of knew that, like, I texted him being like, I really don't feel well the night of the panic attack, but no one knew what was leading up to that. Like, nobody knew
Yeah.
that, 2 weeks prior in my car, I was driving to see my little sister through the Big Sisters program that we have here. And I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was just breathing through my nose and I felt like I couldn't breathe. And I had to open a window because I was like gasping for air. But then it went away and I just didn't really think anything of it. But looking back on it, I was like, oh, that might have been a warning sign that something was coming, that maybe I should take care of myself. But like, I wasn't
Yeah.
sharing the intimate details of that because I truly just suppressed it. I was like, oh, this isn't important at all. But it
Yeah.
was. It truly was very important.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the societal influences. I think we're so influenced by the hustle culture mentality. And I know, I'm a little bit older than you, but it feels like it's been present for so long. And it was the
Yeah.
same for me, like, go, go, go. It's that next thing. You're always wanting to achieve the next thing. And I think that's a big part of high functioning anxiety and perfectionism is you're
Yeah.
typically an achiever. You're
Yeah.
typically a high performer and you've always been that way. And so you're always looking to reach the next thing. And it's like along the
Hmm.
way, there is no enjoyment. You're not having fun. You're seeing everything as a destination. Like, I have to get to that place. I have to get to that place. And you work your
Hmm.
butt off, and your brain is like, please give me a break. And that's when you get to
Yeah.
that point where your brain's like, nope, I'm not doing this anymore. And that
Hmm.
can be a really scary place, especially when, you experience panic. And if you haven't experienced it before, it can be really, really
Yeah.
scary. And even if it's your
Yes.
500th time experiencing a panic attack, it can be really scary. So
Hmm.
I'd love to talk about what are some things that started to help you to find balance and just start to change and shift things to not have such a go, go, go mentality and to slow down.
Yeah, this was like a very like resistant journey for me. And I love to sort of share a little bit about it because like as I mentioned to you, like I was looking for every quick fix in the book. Like I was like, okay, I'm going to fix this in 5 days because I have a few days off work and I was running a business. I was helping run a small business. And like my boss wasn't able to take on because he wasn't a kinesiologist. So we had to like think about how we were going to navigate that. And it was just really, really difficult to navigate all of those things. So it was just one of those things where it was like, you know what? I need to fix this now. I need to fix it right now. Like, I only have a few days. Like, I have clients to see, I have things to do. And to be completely honest, at the beginning, I just kept working. I definitely started to like, I didn't have any caffeine. I definitely would go on more walks and things like that. But I truly just kept working because unfortunately, like, I think a lot of people can resonate with the fact that we don't always have a choice. And it's really, really difficult to navigate something like this when you're like, but I have 500 things to do. Like what I did do at first was I did stop all my volunteering. I just said like, hey, not doing well. And like even then I had so much shame and guilt. Like truly when I had this panic attack, I was like, well, my life is over. I'm truly never going to get into medicine. Like because well now I'm like screwed essentially. Like it's just like immediately that perfectionism just came out in so many ways. Like it got worse when I had anxiety, and not just because of the anxiety, but because I had tied my worth to my productivity for so long that it was like, oh crap, like now it's going to be like 10 times worse. Like, cause it was just like, oh, I need to do this and that and this and that. And it was overwhelming. So what really started for me, the first few months were just really rocky. I wanted those quick fixes and they didn't come. And it just created more resistance, more frustration. Every day I felt like I was staying by bear. And what was funny was I used to try to quantify how much I'd healed by a percentage. So like this happened in October. This happened in October. And like the next day, this is so tragic. This is going to be like my one story. So I am absolutely obsessed with the Jonas Brothers since childhood. And the next day after my first panic attack was the Jonas Brothers concert. My partner still took me and he was extremely supportive. We actually like stood for most of the concert, like out, because I don't know about you, but like for me, especially with anxiety, like the bass on my chest felt so weird when it's like a big concert hall that it was just like a big trigger for me. So we literally watched the concert from like the atrium hallway. Like we weren't in our seats for very often just because like my mouth was dry. I literally felt like I was running from a bear, but nothing was going to stop me from going to that Jonas Brothers concert. So that was important to me. So we did that. It was like my first little bit of exposure therapy that I truly didn't know that I was doing at the time. That was a minor segue, but I had to think, I was like, oh my gosh, the Jonas Brothers concert. Um,
I love it.
yeah, that was very important to me. But for me, it was like a few months of just like resistance, constant resistance. And it was like January and I was like, I'm 90% better. And truly, when I look back, I was like 2% better, like probably not even 2% better because I was still resisting it. I thought that I
Yeah.
was getting better, but I wasn't. And what really changed my perspective was I'm a big reader, but like I'd never really pursued. So I'd read a little bit of Brene Brown before Panic Anxiety. I read The Gifts of Imperfection and I thought that was like such a beautiful book and it really spoke to me. But I was also living in such a high functioning anxiety cycle that like nothing she could have said in that book, albeit so beautiful, would have like stopped me or got me to reflect on anything, even though I thought it was beautiful. But I actually picked up Joshua Fletcher's Panicking About Panic book. So I like was
Yeah.
Googling like again like quick fixes. I was like Googling every anxiety book in the world. And I came across his book and I was like, you know what? I like read the intro and I was like, okay, like I like that you're kind of giving it to me in like little like digestible chunks that is like making it sound so much more or so much less sciency and so much less it's just like brass tacks, like what is this? And
Yeah.
I loved it. So I read Panicking About Panic and then I read Practical About Panic. And like those books, I literally read, I think probably 6 times each, because every time I would find this like new little bit. So like first, like his little diagram about the umbrella and like, cause I was hyper focusing on every bodily sensation possible, like everything going on in here was like, ooh. So I just was like, you know what, let's call it anxiety. Let's just call it what it is. Because instead of freaking out about like my throat closing in, which isn't happening or anything like that, let's just call it anxiety. So that was like my biggest tip from him. And like that actually did help. Like it was just a little bit at start, but like I would just try to be like, okay, I'm just gonna call it anxiety and just see what happens here. And I did, and it helped. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then he does talk a little bit about lifestyle. And I had like done my plethora of Dr. Googling at the time.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay, like, I can get a little bit more sleep. I can do that. Cause like truly I wasn't really like surviving very much on the sleep I was even getting, even if I got 10 hours of sleep. And then the issue is sometimes in the night I would wake up gasping for air for whatever reason. And then I couldn't get back to sleep. Um, and so much so that at that time, I had to go to my doctor and be like, I think I need something like medication wise, maybe not long term, but like, can I get something? So I ended up on Ativan for a little while because
Mm.
I just couldn't control and I had no idea what was going on. And my body was so dysregulated that the only thing that it would at least calm me to a point where I could do anything was Ativan. And it was like, some people find it very helpful to have that sort of pocket pill there if you need it, especially at first. I won't say like it became a comfort for me. Like I used to carry the Ativan. Like I literally used it for 3 days, but I would carry it with me for like months because I was
Yeah.
just so attached to it. And that's when I started to realize that a lot of my patterns were like safety patterns. Like I created so many over the months that I was met resisting that, I read Joshua's book and I was like, you know what? I think I need to change my approach here. Like, I think that this resistance thing may not be working for me. I don't feel that much better. And at the time, so my my panic attack was in October. And then in December, I found out I got my medical school interview. And then February was the interview. And then I got in May. So like all of this was happening while I was like, my life was still moving forward, but I was not feeling any better. And
Yeah.
that's when I knew I had to change my trajectory. So lifestyle was huge for me and truly practicing imperfect acceptance. And another thing that really helped was I also picked up, so along with panicking about panic, I also picked up Kristen Neff's books on self compassion. And that's when the true healing started because I didn't really realize how incompassionate I was to myself until I read her books and I was like, wait, people talk to themselves like this? Like people don't just like tell themselves mean things all the time? Like cuz that's what's going on up here. Like I literally thought that I had like failed and then I was convinced that like everyone knew that they could see my anxiety. Like, I did my medical school interview literally like freaking out. Like I'm pretty sure I did the entire interview panicking because I just
Yeah.
like I was in such an acute dysregulation of my nervous system at the time that like there was no way I could be calm. Like I didn't even know what calm was. Like to the point where like I had like a face rash that had come from stress. Like I had stress eczema on my face that I had to cover up for this interview. And like it was just like wild. And I was so convinced that everyone could see me. And I was like, no one's going to like me. Like, I look anxious. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. Like looking back on it, I was like, this is silly. And then they let me in because like I was a very strong candidate and like I love chatting, I love communicating and like it shined through. But like truly internally, I was like, you're trash. Like you're 100% not going to do this. And it was just like, I just thought
Yeah.
everyone talked to themselves like that. And then I
Yeah.
read Kristen Neff's book and I was like, oh, all right, maybe people shouldn't talk to themselves like that. And then that's when I started to dabble in that self compassion and just starting
Yeah.
to recognize when that inner critic was there and be like, oh,
Mm.
that's not me. Like that 100% isn't me. That's just what I've been, my like neural circuitry has been trained to do because I've just perpetuated this perfectionism and this high functioning nature for so long. And to be honest, it even seeped into my anxiety recovery. It 100% was like, I wanted to perfect anxiety for those first few
Yeah.
months, especially when I got in May. I was like, well, I'm going to be healed by September because if I'm not, then this is terrible. And like, I went so perfectionist into it that like, I had to stop. Like, I had to be like, Carly, like, no, like, this is not how we do this because it
Yeah.
wasn't, it wasn't making it better. If anything, it was putting pressure on me that I didn't need, that would make me more stressed out, that would make me more anxious at the time. And then it would just kind of keep this cycle going.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you mentioned that because it's like all these things, right, too,
Yeah.
internally, but you just don't. I know so many times like I would sit down in my therapist's office and she would say something to me like, you have to be more kind to yourself, Shannon. And I know I would sit there and literally roll my eyes because I would be like, look, lady, that
Yeah.
is not the thing that is going to get rid of panic attacks. Like, what
Yes.
the heck is going to do it? And you need to stop teaching me these little silly things, but it was
Mhm.
the little silly things that actually helped me the most. And that's the
Yes.
hardest part I think about recovery is like you're
Mhm.
looking for, a pill or a thing and you turn to really unhealthy behaviors like safety objects and safety behaviors, and it's just
Mhm.
because you're so desperate, it feels so
Yeah.
terrible and you're trying to get rid of it, but it truly is. Self-compassion goes such a long way.
Yes.
Lifestyle changes go such a long way. Like your sleep
Mhm.
is so, so important. And that was something consistently for me too. Back
Yeah.
burner, like I was getting, 4 to 5 hours of sleep at night and I was
Yeah.
staying up doing homework while drinking wine at midnight. And I
Yeah.
was like, what was I doing? I mean,
Uh,
anyone could have told me that was the furthest from the best choice for me. But at the time, I was just on that hamster wheel and I kept
yeah.
going. And I'm so glad that you mentioned. So Carly was talking about Josh, Anxiety Josh on Instagram,
Yeah.
Josh's books, and they're great because I think a big part for him is he's been through it. So
Yeah.
now he's, a therapist, but he's also been through it. And his approach is simplistic and very practical and explaining things in a very simple way. And
Mhm.
that's what I love too about your journey and your account and what you share is that you also try to keep it really simple and just
Yeah.
provide like the tips that have worked for you. And
Mhm.
oftentimes it is the stuff that we roll our eyes at and we think this is not going to be the thing that helps me, but it
Yes.
is. So I so appreciate you coming on, Carly. It's been
Mhm.
such a fun conversation. If people want to find you and connect with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I definitely think the easiest way is just head on to Healing the Anxious Mind on Instagram. And like, I am always open to like I'll see DMs, or like there's email contacts, there's lots of things in my little link tree thing that I'm dabbling in currently that always, and then I'm starting up a mailing list, actually, like a newsletter sort of thing that goes out every month where I just share a little bit more in depth. Sometimes that Instagram caption limit is so difficult to work
Yeah.
in. So I decided to do a little bit of an email blast that I'll just send out probably monthly or bi-monthly. It just depends on my schedule. And I'm going to be starting to share that. So if that's something that interests you too, head on over and I will be sharing some tips that I found helpful.
Yeah, I love that so much. Keep raising the awareness and keep sharing what helped you. And I know personally, and I know some of my listeners would love to hear and see more about your journey in medical school, because I think
Yeah.
it's so interesting now to hear, where you were and where you are now, and just
Hmm.
being able to better recognize like what's helped you to get here and to find that better balance. And how are you currently balancing medical school with an Instagram account, and I'm sure many other things that you have on your plate. So
Yeah.
I am just very grateful that you share everything that you do and keep doing
Mm.
such amazing work.
Oh, thank you so much, Shannon. I really appreciate it. And it's been lovely to come on. Thank you for inviting me. It's great. I love that you created, I was so jazzed when you reached out to me because you are someone that I've looked up to for a long time. And your posts so resonate with what
Uh,
I experienced, especially just with like panic and just that acceptance piece. You really focus on that like acceptance, and that inner critic doesn't always have to be negative. And I love that you bring that
yeah.
in because there's always that like happy voice on the other shoulder too. That's like, you know what? No, we're going to be fine. Like it'll be
Yeah.
fine. And it truly will be fine. For anyone struggling, it will be fine. Sure, it's those little silly things, and it may not seem like you're making any progress. But when you look back, truly, when you zoom out, you're making a lot more progress than you think you are. It's just that in that acute moment of struggle, that little tiny dip in your large, sort of slowly upward turning curve, that's where
Mhm.
you feel upset. That's where it's like, oh crap, like not this again. And I still feel that way sometimes, but you will get better. It is possible to heal.
Oh, well, that is the absolute best note to end on. Thank you again, Carly. I hope you enjoyed this episode of A Healthy Push. If you want more, head on over to ahealthypush.com for the show notes and lots more tips, tools, and inspiration that will support your recovery. And if you're hoping for me to cover a certain topic, be sure to join my Instagram community at A Healthy Push and let me know in the comments what you want to hear next.